In this tutorial, we will learn how to create a rusty metal surface in Blender, using only the procedural shaders. This is quite easy to set up, and easy to customize for your particular scene. You can also use the same technique to create various different effects. For example, we can create a moss effect, like this brick wall with green patches. The technique is same as that of the rust surface, only the colors and a few things are changed for this wall. So, let us start with a blank new file. We will set up a steel material for this default cube, and add some rust on its surface. So let us first turn on the rendered view mode. We can also disable the scene world so that the HDRI lighting can take effect. This is important for a metal surface. Now go to the Materials tab, where we already have a material added by default, with a principled BSDF. You can use this default white color for steel material, but please increase this metallic property all the way up to 1. And we get a material that almost looks like steel. And another thing is, this roughness value should be somewhere near 0.4. Now, we will add the rust effect on this metal object. We need a shader editor for that. So, split the screen into half. Resize it as needed, and then open the shader editor in the left-hand side panel. We can see the principled BSDF node for our default material. We need to add few more nodes for the desired effect. So go to the Add menu, and add one Texture Coordinate node. And place it like this. Then again go to the Add menu, and under the Texture group, we have two important textures, the musgrave texture and the noise texture. We can use either of them. The noise texture is little simple, but the musgrave texture gives us several useful options, so let us go with the musgrave texture node. Then, we have to also add a color ramp node from the converter group, and place it here. Good. Now, add the object output of the texture coordinate node to the vector input of the musgrave texture. And then connect its height output to the FAC input of the color ramp node. And finally, connect its color output to the base color of the principled BSDF. We get a pattern like this. And we can easily control this pattern by changing these parameters. First, in this texture function, you can test each of these functions and find out what works best for you. For this tutorial, we'll go with the default FBM. And in the scale field, if we increase this value to say 7 or 8, we get a more granular pattern here. But we actually need less granular, so let us bring it down, or we can enter 3. And for the details, we can use a value of 10 for a decent effect. But the most important field is this dimension value. If we reduce it to just 1, we get a pattern similar to fungus. We can make it even better with a value of 0.5. Although it may look like a fungus, we can use it to create a rust effect. We will convert this pattern step by step into a rust. Let us reduce it little more. It gives a slightly different look now. You can experiment with this and determine what amount of rust and what amount of corrosion you need. Let us go with a value of 0.4 here. We will now convert this surface into a rusty and corroded one. We don't just need a texture, we also need the corrosion effect on these spots. So we need to add some bumps that will follow this same pattern we created for the texture. For that, go to the Add menu, and add one bump node. And place it here. We need little more space for the other nodes. So, let us move these nodes toward left. The bump node should have the same input that we used for the texture pattern. So, instead of the base color, let us connect this to the height input of our bump node. Then connect its normal to the normal of our principled BSDF. So we get a nice bump pattern on this surface. This will eventually create the rust, but we actually need some depression or cavities. These bumps are projected outside, away from the surface, but we need the opposite effect that looks like a corrosion. So just turn on this invert option on the bump node, and we will get exactly what we need. The bumps are now converted into these cavities, which is perfect, but we need to also add some color effects for these spots where there is some rust. So we will now duplicate this color ramp node, which will control the base pattern of the rust, one for this bump node, and another for the base color. While this is selected, press Shift-D on your keyboard to duplicate it. We need to use a duplicate copy here, because we will soon make some changes to this particular color ramp. Connect this height output for this duplicate node as well. and then connect its color output to the base color of our principled BSDF. Now, we will modify these color settings to create some orange tints on these spots that represent the rusty area, not the black areas because they are not the rust spots. Rather, these white areas are actually corroded, they represent the rusts on this surface. So, we will change this black end, or the black color, to a complete white color, so that we get a normal steel metal look. The plain areas are now back to their default color. And for these corroded areas, we will change this white end to orange, so that the rust gets an orange color. So, click on this little handle to select it. And then, let us change its color to some shade of orange. Some color that looks like rust. We can fine-tune this by directly entering these values here. So for the hue value, let us go with 0.03. The saturation can be 1. But let us change this value field, little lower or darker, maybe 0.8. Okay, but the color is limited to some distinct points here. We can spread it further by moving this handle toward left like this. Let us fix it somewhere around 0.3. So this gives a very nice rusty look for our cube surface. Almost perfect, but we can make it even better by adding some darker colors along the borders of these corroded areas that make them even more prominent. Rusts often catch dust particles at the corners. So we will add few more control points here. First click on this plus button to add one more control point, and it should have the same orange color. So click on this color bar. Hue is 0.03. Saturation should be 1. And this value should be 0.8. And somewhere in between these two, we will add another control point. So click on this plus button again, and then click and drag this control point to this position, somewhere between the other two. And for this particular control point, we will use a very dark shade of the same orange color. So hue 0.03, saturation is 1. But please reduce this value to 0.1. We need to narrow down the spread of this dark color, so that it highlights only the border lines and nothing else. So let us first change the position of this handle, or the control point, to 0.05. It should be very close to the first control point. And this control point should be placed very close to the last one. We can fine-tune this to 0.25. So you can see, the border areas are now a little darker, exactly as we wanted. You can further experiment with this and come up with your own variation, matching with your overall scene. For example, you can use a different color shade for the rust. So, we are done with the rust part. The only thing still left is, these flat areas are too flat. Ideally they should also deform slightly, to create a realistic effect. We can add some bump noise to them as well, for the deformation. And we can do that easily, by manipulating this normal input for our bump node. So first select this node, and press Shift-D on your keyboard, to duplicate it. Then connect its normal, to the normal of the first bump node. You may not see any immediate change here, because we are yet to add some noise texture as an input to this second bump node. So, go to the Add menu and from the Texture group, add one noise texture. For a better result, we need to use a higher scale value here, maybe 10. And change the detail value to also 10. Then connect its output to the height input of this bump node. As a result, you can now see some uneven surface pattern all over our object. But the effect is too much, so we will reduce its impact by changing the strength value to 0.1. Now we have a moderate bump. We can make it even better, or more realistic, by using a 2-layer noise factor. So press Shift-D to duplicate this noise texture. Then, increase its scale value to 200. And connect its output to the vector input of the first noise texture. So we get a delicate treatment to our flat surface areas. Let us now close this shader editor as we are done with it. So, we have the rust effect on our cube. You can use this same technique to create a different kind of corrosion as well, using a different material. And we can also test the look and feel of this rust effect on another object. So let us add something else here, maybe one UV sphere. Turn on the Shade Smooth option from the Object menu. Then open this drop-down in the Materials tab, and select the same material that we had created for the cube. So the rusty material is looking nice even for a sphere. You can use it anywhere, but please remember to customize the amount of corrosion based on the nature of your object, so that it remain in sync with its surroundings. And one more important thing. Like any other metal object, this effect renders best with an appropriate lighting, for example, the HDRI environment. If you are not familiar with HDRI lighting, you can check our previous tutorial on the same, the link is in the video description. So, I hope you liked today's topic on the rust effect. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel.